Hello everyone, you are welcome to today's session in our journey to learn Python. Today we'll be talking about variables and data types. This is a very important topic that is going to take 3 lectures. I have decided to break it into 3 because of the central role it occupies when you talk about programming. There is no way you can learn programming in any language without knowing how to work with variables. So just like I normally do, let's go out of programming just for a second. Let's talk about what we are supposed to be familiar with more than the computer programming, concept of variables. Let's talk about our brains as human beings. This is a side view, or what biologists will call the lateral view of the human brain. I don't need to tell you what your brain does. It's one of the most important, organs in your body outside your heart. Your brain is next. It coordinates everything the human body does, including what the heart does. Now, so we know in its bid to coordinate activities, we often use it for 2 things. We store the information there, and it's the seat of human intelligence. So when you talk about intelligence, most of the time we think about it in the context of you being able to recall information as quickly as you want it, and then ability to manipulate those pieces of information that you have in your brain in a clever manner to generate new ideas. So it's not just about storing things in your brain that counts and recalling. It's your ability to generate new insights based on the data that you have stored. So when human beings are seen to be brilliant, sometimes we often fall for the ability to recall info that you have stored, and we say, oh, the guy is brilliant or the lady is clever. But true brilliance comes in when you can generate new ideas based on what you have said. But that's a conversation for another day. How does this impact us as programmers? We are impacted by this because we can learn from the way the human brain works. The human brain has neurons, which are like the most basic units in it. And in the cerebral cortex alone, we're told that it has about 10 to 20 billion neurons. And in the cerebellum, which you are seeing, it's supposed to have between 55 to 70 billion neurons there. So these are the basic units that help the brain function in its basic format. So when you want to draw a correlation between human brain and the computer memory, which is basically what we'll be talking about when we focus on variables in the next slide, I need us to see the way the human brain works. When you see your friends anywhere or your siblings, you remember their names. Yeah, when you see your siblings, you don't remember your friends' names. When you see your parents, you don't remember your siblings' name. Why? Everybody has their names, and you have stored those names carefully in your brain. So when you see daddy, you don't call daddy with your younger brother's name. When you see mommy, you don't call mommy with your younger sister's name. When you see your friends in school, you don't call them with your siblings' names because you have codified those messages and you've stored them carefully in your brain. So your brain can go to the appropriate storage location where it has kept those entries and bring them out. So sometimes when you learn in class, you also store those elements of learning in your memory. And when you struggle to recall, that is when they'll say, oh, you had a memory lapse or memory loss. You see some people will be tapping their head trying to, recall the information. It's because the brain is scanning where it has stored the info, and as soon as it gets it, it retrieves it for you. So when people talk about forgetfulness, it's not like the information has disappeared from the brain. It's just because you can't really pick it anytime you need it. And as soon as someone prompts you, then you say, oh, I remember I had this information stored. If it was poorly stored, then retrieval is going to be a big mess. So in computer world, we equally do the same thing. Just like the human brain can store info and bring them out, we also can store information in the computer memory. So see the computer memory as being represented by series of boxes in which things can be stored. You can store your first name, birth date, annual salary, your height, genotype, weight, your BP, the population of the country where you live, the size of your family, whether you are still active or retired, all sorts of information that you may think to be relevant can be stored in different parts of the computer memory. And when we talk about computer memory here, we're not talking about the hard disk where information could be stored permanently. Rather, we are talking about the volatile component of the memory, which is called the random access memory. Once you shut down the computer, everything in the RAM disappears. That is where your computer programs work. When the computer is fired on or powered on, the program you've written will run within the random access memory. So it's a volatile thing. When the computer is powered down, all of the information in there will disappear. So if you are thinking of storing the information permanently, you will need to consider keeping your data in the database. That's a separate conversation. We will get to that much later in our training. You learn how to create databases and then persist your information there. But while the program is running, we'll be making use of the memory of the computer. So this is the graphical representation of the way the computer stores info. So when you ask for your height, it knows where it has kept it. It goes into that address and then it brings it out for you. One message that you need to get from here is that all of these different info, your salary, your birth date, your population, whether you are active or retired, your genotype, your BP, your last score in a particular subject, they are of different data types. So in Python, just like in many programming languages, there are different types of data that you can handle, and they are related to the way we deal with data in the real human world. There are things that we call strings, which are text-based entries, something like your name, your contact address. Surprisingly, your phone number falls into that category. Your phone number is not a number per se, because you can't use it for arithmetic purpose. So in computer world, we'll capture it as a text or as a string. If you want to capture it as a number, it means the first zero in your phone number is going to disappear, and that doesn't really make too much sense. So we will normally keep phone numbers as text. Your post office number, your zip code also most times will be treated as text. Then we have data type of integer formats. These are all numbers, 1, 2 to infinity. And then we have the negative set of integers as well. Some people will tell you integer is not extending to infinity. I agree with them, but we're talking about positive and negative whole numbers here when we think about integer. So your family size will fall into that category. The population of your city will fall into that category. Your age will fall into that category. Then we have data type for float, which is dealing with decimals, anything that can take point, something like 3.142 for pi, your weight, your height, your salary, the prices of items can contain decimal. We will consider those ones to be float. Then things that can be true or false, yes or no, 0 or 1, are captured as Boolean. We're measuring the state of those variables. So if I say, are you retired? You say no. Oh, is retired is true or false? You can answer that question. So those are Boolean variables. These are variables that we often make use of in the default setting of Python, but there are instances when we need to invoke extra types of variables like date, because they are data types. We may often need to process date-based variables. We will need to be able to do that. So you can handle date, you can handle time, because these are standard elements. So if I piggyback one moment, if you just want to describe what your variables now mean, because this is supposed to be a conversation on variables. Variables are memory locations in your computer where you store and retrieve information from. Even when you finish processing some info, you need to keep them in memory locations. So those are what we call variables. So the challenge now is, how do you name variables in the computer environment? There are rules that you need to follow. One, you need to give meaningful names to your variables, nothing cryptic. Yeah, annual salary is better written this way than Ann_sal. Today you may remember Ann_sal. Next year you may not. So it's better to use something more descriptive so that people will know what the variable is all about. It can be a single word like salary or first name, and it can contain multiple words. When it contains multiple words, we do not want you to put hyphen or space in between them. It has to be a single block of words, and you can join them with underscore. That is one of the rules that you need to have at the back of your mind. We can have numbers as part of our variable names like address1, address2, but numbers cannot start variable names. So you can't have first address or second address. Those two options are not acceptable. There are reserved words in Python that you cannot use for variable names. I'm going to show you in the next slide what those words are. You need to be mindful of those words and never be tempted to use them as variable names. Now, in Python, there are conventions that we normally follow. If you are using constants, constants are variables that their values don't change in the course of your program, like pi, like fx rate, maybe height of your screen or the width of your screen. We often want those special variables to appear in uppercase or through. But for other variable types, you can use lowercase or through, like I've done with first name, or you can use the convention called camel casing, which is going to be the first character will be small letter, like I've seen in first name, or you use the second convention where the first letter in every major word in your variable will be in capital, like the second first name that you see on the screen. So once you follow these variable rules, you are not likely going to run into issues when you are naming your variables. So this is the list of Python keywords that I said we need to avoid using as a variable name. So you cannot use force, continue, return, assert, finally. All of these words are not allowed except this last set, case, switch, match, type. But ideally, sorry, it should be case, switch, and match. But ideally, you should avoid using them. So I'll recommend in a strict sense that you don't go the route of making use of any of these. See them as sacred words that you must not tamper with when you are naming your variables. So in this lecture today, we've talked about variables. We've identified them as memory locations in the computer where our information can be stored. And these memory locations need to be given a name so that they become like your post office box where your envelopes are kept or your letters are kept. And when it comes to retrieval of info, you can easily go in there and retrieve the required info. There are rules that you need to follow when you are naming variables. We've given those rules. They have to be unique, they have to be descriptive, not cryptic. They need to make sense. You cannot use number as the first character in variable names, but numbers can be part of them. You can use hyphen to join words. You can use underscore. There cannot be space between names in variable. And we encourage you to use uppercase for your constants. You can use lowercase for your variables, or you use camel case for your variables. So once you understand this, you will find it easy. playing with variables. So this is the end of the conversation, part 1 for variables. Thanks a lot for listening. I see you in the next video. Bye.